property. Like as I showed you in that one quote previously, the persons would be distinguished. Obviously, you can make a distinction here between way of act, right, i.e. the way of origins, but it would just be an improper way because it's not something intrinsic according to Aquinas. So
Right.
what actually makes the distinguishing features here would just be via the way of form, right, which is what he says. Obviously, I'm not negating that you can account for a real distinction via these intrinsic relations, and I'm not negating that is the case, but I'm simply using that way of distinguishing to show that we can still distinguish in the same manner between the essence and persons, because even though the relations are identical to the persons, or to the essence, a distinguishing feature can still arrive, right? Because obviously we see that there's a distinguishing feature between between the persons, despite these relations being identical to the persons they're set of. You know what I mean?
Yes, but obviously, even though we say the relations are the essence, we don't predicate them that way. They're predicated. Excuse me. They're predicated relatively. They're not predicated essentially. So I don't see your objection would apply if we were to say that, like, that the essence is begotten or the essence is unbegotten. We can't say the essence is unbegotten, but by the term unbegotten, we just mean it's ingenerate. But that's not a property. That's the negation of a property. But that's kind of a tangent point. That wasn't what I'm trying to get at. My point is that, like I said just a second ago, the relations are the essence, but they're not predicated essentially. They're predicated relatively.
But essentially, that still wouldn't really matter here than the way they're predicated, right? Because you're simply saying that they're just predicated relatively by virtue of these just being relations. But as I said previously, and according to Aquinas, these relations can be said to just be intrinsic properties. So we can simply just say that these properties are something predicated of the essence relatively insofar as they are relations relating to the person and the essence here by virtue of identity, or i.e. relative identity. Right, but that still would just beg the question here, right? Because even though, right, the essence is identical to these properties, then identity statement is still made. Obviously, you would say that the persons that they are set of, i.e. the relations, we can predicate these properties of the persons essentially insofar as it is something which is, constitutive and is something essential for its reality to be. Right? Obviously, for the essence, that's not necessarily the case. But still, that doesn't necessarily negate that it's a distinguishing feature or can count as a distinguishing feature. Because in reality, I'll give an example. In reality, we can distinguish things via non-essential properties in creation, right? So it doesn't have to be something essential to distinguish.
Well, we would say it, but we would say in God, though, God is not composed of substance and accidents, so we wouldn't say
I know.
We're distinguished by accidents at all.
I'm just saying that distinguishing via something like it being essential isn't really like, it would be kind of a trivial point here, because generally speaking, we can still distinguish things via like something non-essential here by an accident, right? Obviously, in the case of the Trinity, though, the persons would be distinguished via an essential property, i.e. the constitutive property.
So I want to ask, I kind of want to ask you about, since I defined earlier the relations as the divine essence existing or subsisting in three distinct ways, I want to ask you, I assume since you're an Aristotelian, you do believe that there is a real distinction in finite being between existence and essence, but not in infinite being, right?
Yeah. God is pure esse. He is identical to his existence. And we're distinct from our existence.
Okay, so my issue and how this ties into the whole person essence thing, it would seem that if we say that the persons are not identical to the essence, which is what you're trying to argue for, then that would mean that essence and existence are really distinct in God, because I define the relations as the modes of how God subsists, how the essence subsists.
Essence in this case would just be identical to existence here, so I'm basically saying that it would just be improper.
So that the essence is identical to the persons, exactly.
Yeah, but it would just be improper to make the assertion that there's a distinguishing feature between that existence and that person, as you have to predicate whatever you predicate of these persons, whatever you predicate of the essence has to likewise be the case here, as I've shown, or otherwise you'd have a distinguishing feature between the two. When we say that, according to our theology, that there's an infinite being and that there's an essence in existence, we can still justify the assertion that there's no actual real distinguishing feature between them. But here, I just showed how this assertion would just be invalid between them, because there is a distinguishing feature. So you can't really make an appeal to that. The whole issue is that there's three persons. So obviously, if you're going to make the assertion that only the Father is that which is identical to the essence, and you wouldn't really fall under this problem. But my whole point is that now you have three persons being identical to it, then a distinguishing feature arises between the essence and the persons here. That's essentially the whole issue.
Yes, a distinguishing feature arises formally speaking, just not materially speaking.
What's the difference?
The difference between material and formal identity is that material identity, for example, would be if I, for example, say man is man, that's where obviously the terms are identical. They signify the same thing in reality and the definitions are the same. But if I say something like else, like a man is a human, that would be where they're signifying the same thing in reality, but the definitions are different. That's the difference between material and formal identity.
Well, yeah, that would
That's what I'm
just
saying
be.
about the issue of person and essence, is that when we say the person is the essence, yes, it signifies the same thing in reality, but the definitions are different. They're formally different.
Yeah, but that would just seem to be here a trivial point, since that you're just making a distinguishing feature in definition. You're just making like some sort of opaque context in here in which they, or an intentional context in which they cannot be the same truth value by virtue, in all cases, by virtue of their definition here. But that's not necessarily, like, that would just be a trivial point. So we're speaking of what's in reality, and we're speaking of the reality here. And the reality here is that the persons, the properties of the persons, are just identical to the essence as well. So that doesn't really address that there's still this distinguishing feature which can distinguish the persons here, because you're simply just saying that there's a material identity, whatever, or it's a formal distinction, but that would just be via their definition here, right? And I'm saying that, well, no, there's something in reality, or we can speak in our way of language. This property is identical to the essence. And obviously, this property, which is identical, can account for a distinction. So this whole point of formal material identity would just seem to be trivial here.
So you just said that there's a real distinguishing feature between the relations, or between the persons. Obviously, we agree with that. I don't know if you misspoke there.
Hey, what'd you say?
I heard you say that there's the issue is that there is a real distinction between the persons, or a real distinguishing feature. I agree with that.
Oh, no, I meant between the persons, and like when I say between the persons, I mean like the essence and person.
Okay, persons and the essence. All right, that's fine. So my issue is I don't see how denying the real distinction between person and essence doesn't lead you also to have to deny the real identity between essence and existence in God, because you're saying that it is not because what you're saying, for example, would be that, like, I define the relations as the divine essence subsisting in three distinct ways: paternity, filiation, spiration, right? And you said you do believe in that essence and that God is pure essa. But if essence and exist are distinct in God, then that would mean he's contingent, and it is not his essence to exist. But if person and essence are really distinct, that would mean that the way that God exists, or the subsistences, are distinct from his essence, really, and so that it is not God's essence to subsist in these three different ways.
Well, yeah, quite frankly, yeah, that just seems to be giving the implication of my argument here. Yeah, that essentially what I said previously, I would just restate what I said. Yeah, that's quite frankly the case here. As I said previously, when I make the assertion that my God is identical to his existence and his essence is identical to his existence, I wouldn't be able to point a distinguishing feature between his essence and existence here in reality. Thus, I can be justified in making this assertion that he's identical to his existence, right? But I'm saying that you are unjustified in making that assertion, right? Obviously, essence and existence is synonymous here in the case of a necessary existence, because essence is just identical to existence. So when we speak of essence just colloquially, but anyways, I can still point out a distinguishing feature between the essence and person. Right, so that's essentially the whole issue. You would just be unjustified in making this identity statement. And when we make an identity statement, we were saying that there is no real distinction, whether it's by necessity of essence and existence or not. There can still be nothing to really distinguish them. But I'm pointing out that there is something which really distinguishes them. This assertion
that depends what type of identity you're talking about.
Well, you're just speaking about relative identity here, and obviously relative identity would just not give some sort of metaphysical account for why things are identical. But they would simply say that they would just use sortals to show this identity relation. But they still don't negate that you can use non-sortal predicates to show a distinguishing feature. Obviously, we use non-sortal predicates to distinguish the persons, right? So they're not necessarily negating that in their thesis.
Okay, let me try this another way. Do you believe that in God there's a real distinction between essence and subsistence?
What?
Do you believe that in God there's a real distinction between essence and subsistence? I'm kind of changing a word. I'm changing existence to subsistence to try and tie this into the person-essence issue.
Well, God's existence just is subsistence, so that would just be begging the question, yeah. I mean,
exactly, and since God has three subsistences, if that's really distinct from his essence, then it means that there is a real distinction between essence and existence in God. Under your argument, not under mine, because I say the persons are the essence.
Yeah, but that just seems to be begging the question here. You're just simply flipping a term and just substituting it, which you're just explaining in a different manner.
I'm making a reductio ad absurdum argument for why person and essence cannot be really distinct, at least in the way they.
Yeah, but you're saying why they cannot be really distinct. I'm saying, well, like, according to, I agree with you. I'm not saying that I'm saying that, yeah, I agree that obviously the existence cannot be distinct from the essence and a necessary existence. Otherwise, that would result in contingency. But I'm saying that this is essentially the whole point. You're giving a reductio to that, but you're not really tackling my argument adequately here, right? Because I'm making an argument as to why that cannot be the case for you. As I said previously, between essence and God's subsistence, there is no real distinction. So we can be justified in making this assertion under a one-person or Unitarian perspective that there is no real distinction, since whatever is predicated of this existence can be predicated of this person also. Thus, an identity statement um, can be deemed coherent here. But according to you, it cannot be deemed coherent here because you have three persons and you have all these properties, which then you can have to derive a distinction between the essence and person. As I said previously as well, you'd only be justified in making a one-person identity statement, right?
No,
you can't really make it two-way or three-way.
What I was saying is that if essence and subsistence, the term I use, essence and subsistence, are really distinct, that would mean that it is not God's essence to subsist in these three ways, under your presupposition. That would make God contingent.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. But you're just simply giving an implication of what my argument shows and what it concludes.
Yes,
you're not really tackling the argument itself.
It's a reductio.
I know.
The absurd conclusion is something we both agree is absurd.
Yeah,
therefore,
I get it. But that doesn't necessarily directly tackle my argument that I'm giving here. You're just simply saying, okay, yeah, if your argument follows, well, then this is the case. But that's not really showing why my argument is incorrect, right? Because I'm still showing, okay, why my argument follows and why it's coherent. But then you just simply give a reductio as to what follows. Yes, that does follow. That's essentially the whole issue here. You're just restating the issue in the conclusion.
A valid argument. A reductio.
Yes, I'm not saying that a reductio is a valid argument, but I'm saying you're giving a reductio as to what happens if my argument follows. But this is just the implication of my argument. You're not tackling the argument in itself to show why a real distinction or this distinguishing feature would just appear to be trivial, and there can still be an identity statement. We can still deem them to not be really distinct from each other, despite this distinguishing feature. I already gave an example of a one-person identity statement between the essence and existence. How we can still predicate one of the other, or predicate properties of one of the other, and yet we'd still be justified in this identity statement. But you cannot be justified in this identity statement.
Hold on a second. Why can't I attack an argument by attacking its implication?
Because it's not actually showing why the contents of the argument is flawed. You're just simply saying this would just lead to an absurdity if it follows. Well, yeah, quite frankly, that's the conclusion of my argument. It just shows some sort of absurdity. Yeah, you're right. So like, it doesn't really tackle the argument itself. But why is this argument invalid? Right? You're just saying it goes against this. It goes against God's nature, and it would just involve some sort of essence-existence distinction. But that's the whole point here. Yeah, it does involve that, and I'm showing why that's the case. And why it follows that it's the case.
Right? It would only follow if I claim that person and essence are really distinct. I don't claim that.
But I'm showing why that must be the case, though. You're not really directly attacking why it can't be otherwise, or why my argument is flawed. I already gave an example, right? I already showed how a distinction is made here in Thomistic theology, and it's obviously via a lack of an intrinsic property, even though. I don't have an issue with that. Yeah, I know, and I'm saying that is quite frankly the case here between essence and essence and person. There is no exception here, right? That still accounts for a distinction here. And I'm saying that that question has been unanswered and it's untouched yet. You just simply gave me some sort of implication for my argument, which is agreed, and that's quite frankly what my argument states. Yes, that's the whole point.
Your argument is are you trying to argue that under the Thomist view of the Trinity, this results in a real distinction in God between essence and existence? Is that
it just results in a distinction between person and essence, but if you're just simply going to say that these persons are modes of subsistence, i.e. modes of existence, thus they have to be identical to the essence, well then yeah, according to you, that kind of would be the implication.
Well, it wouldn't, because we believe
I just showed how it is.
We believe that the persons are the essence. That doesn't mean that there's a real distinction between essence and existence in God.
I know, but I'm showing how there must be a distinguishing feature between the essence and person. I already gave the argument. You can't just restate your position and say it's just invalid and this would be the implication if this happens. That's not directly tackling the argument. Yes, that's what you did. You gave a reduction if my argument follows. You said, hold on. You said that, okay, it's your argument.
I did two things. I gave a reductio against your argument, and then I restated my position to clarify that the whole essence-existence issue, that's not a problem for me.
Yeah,
but I don't believe that person and essence are really distinct. I don't believe that subsistence and essence are really distinct.
I know,
you said that God's essence is pure essa. It's God's essence to subsist. And we would say it's God's essence to subsist as the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Therefore, he must be identical to the
I know, but your reductio,
the essence.
I'm saying your reductio here is just simply invalid here because it's simply just. I'm not saying that a reductio in general is an invalid inference, but I'm saying that this reductio here does not really touch on my argument or refute my argument because a reductio is simply just saying, okay, this is what happens if your argument follows. Because the persons are just modes of subsistence, they have to be identical to the essence. Well, I'm saying, my argument is simply, and then you're saying that, according to your argument, that it would just show a distinction here. Thus, God is contingent. Well, yeah, you're just kind of helping out my argument here. You're simply saying, they're modes of subsistence. Because I'm showing a distinguishing feature. how are you going to adjust that there's a distinguishing feature between these modes of subsistence and the essence? There can be no distinguishing feature if you're going to a certain identity statement. As I said previously, in my theology, which you made an appeal to, that cannot be the case under a Unitarian point of view, because whatever is predicated of this existence is predicated of this person, i.e. mode of subsistence. So thus, an identity statement can be plausible, it can be deemed coherent, whilst yours cannot be deemed coherent for the reasons I've given, as there's a distinguishing feature between essence and person. Right, so how are you going to adjust that? Like, you need to adjust that directly. You can't simply just show an implication and then restate your position. That's invalid.
What you have to prove is that there is a real material distinction. A real material distinction between essence and person, not a real formal distinction, because we already grant that.
I don't have to give a real material distinction here, because a real material distinction here would just be it would just be with regards to definition. I'm speaking about what's in reality here, right? Which is
material distinction is about what's the same in reality. Formal distinction is about the definition.
Yes, and I'm saying that this distinction, and there is nothing the same about the person in essence for the reasons I've given. There's a distinguishing feature, and obviously I already defined a real distinction here. So how are you going to adjust that there's this distinguishing feature, yet still be, consistent in affirming an identity statement between the essence and person? You wouldn't be able to, because there's still that distinguishing feature which hasn't been addressed.
But I've already said that your argument would only, and this is the same thing I told you in the DMs, and what I said at the beginning when we got on the stage, is that that would only follow if we say that the properties are distinct from the relations. Because if you're talking about a lack of intrinsic properties, and then speaking of the persons having properties that the essence don't have, that implies a real distinction, or at least some sort of distinction.
Yeah, there is no distinction between the property and relation. I never even granted that assertion. But I'm simply saying that despite them being identical to the person they are said of, we can still derive a distinction. Obviously, that's evident in Thomistic theology, because Thomas says that the persons are identical to the relations, i.e. this intrinsic property that are said of them, yet they can still be distinguished by this intrinsic property. So when I say that this son lacks the property of paternity, this is just in a colloquial way of view. I'm not necessarily saying that there's a real property of paternity that this son lacks. It's obviously in a colloquial point of view. I can still say that the father has paternity insofar as it's an identity statement that is identical to this statement. As Aquinas says in his Summa Theologica, there are no actual properties in God, but in our way of language, we can make the assertion that there are obviously properties, right? But they're just identical to God as per ADS. So my way of language is really flawed here, according to Aquinas.
Okay, so what we're talking about is, let's try and make this simple. We're talking about three concrete relations, three concrete properties, so to speak, that are not additional to the things. They're not additional to the persons. They are the persons. And you're saying that they cannot be the same as the essence because of a lack of distinguishing properties. So what are the properties of these relations that cause them to not be?
I'm saying that so according to you, there are actually, according to ADS, right, there are no properties in God. Right, so all these properties are just identical to what they're said of, and as well as the essence. So obviously the relations are identical to the essence, right?
Yes, however, but they're still distinct from each other.
Exactly. Yeah, I know they're still distinct from. Yeah, exactly. That's kind of the point here. What I'm going to, right? So you have the essence being identical to both paternity and filiation, these intrinsic properties, right? Paternity and filiation, but it's not a real property extramental, obviously. But we can still say that it has paternity insofar as it's identical to it, right? However, the son is not identical to paternity, right? Thus, a distinguishing feature here. And I'm saying that this argument here is valid because according to Thomistic theology, the essence or the persons are still identical to what they are said of, but despite that, the properties being identical to what they are said of, right? These properties can still account for a real distinction. Obviously, these relations or intrinsic properties are identical to the persons they are said of, yet we can still use them to distinguish the persons themselves. And likewise, I'm simply just doing that between essence and person. The properties are identical to the essence. Therefore, a distinguishing feature happens between the persons and essence because the father lacks filiation as identity and son lacks paternity by identity as well.
The reason why we can make a real distinction between the persons, even though the relations are identical to the persons they're said of, as you said, and that's true, but the reason why we can still make a real distinction is because relations by their very definition in God have an opposition. There's a terminus. You have to prove that would be the case with the essence and the person, that there's some relation that opposes them such that they must be distinct.
Yeah, I just did right here, right? Because there's still an intrinsic property. It can still be said. It can still be said to be an intrinsic property. So I can simply just say that this intrinsic property is something identical to the essence, right? And thus this intrinsic property accounts for a real distinction between essence and person because it's something identical to the essence. Doesn't matter. You could still say that paternity, or this paternity, the person, right, father, lacks filiation as an identity statement. Thus, something is opposed between the essence and person, since that the essence is identical to this relation of paternity, right? So, or filiation. So there's something opposed between the essence and person here, and it's this intrinsic property which the father is not identical to, i.e., filiation. Likewise with the son and paternity. It's essentially just a way we can speak of relations here, just intrinsic
Okay.
properties.
So it seems almost as though you are making a transitivity argument.
That's not really the transitivity argument. The transitivity argument, no, it's not really close.
You're saying that
oh.
you're saying that paternity and filiation are identical to the divine essence, but not identical to each other. Therefore, they
No, that's not what I said at all. That's not what I said at all. No, transitivity would say that. No, transitivity would say that the persons are identical to the essence, right? Therefore, by virtue of being identical to the essence, they must be identical to each other. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that a distinguishing feature must arise between the essence and person by virtue of this property that the persons are not identical to, whilst the essence is identical to this property. That's no way a correlation to transitivity here. I'm not utilizing transitivity to make a point here. You can easily counter transitivity by just saying that there's an intentional context. But in my argument, I can still grant an intentional context here, according to the Trinity, and a minor virtual distinction, yet still make my argument valid, because intentional contexts don't negate that you can distinguish things via an intrinsic property or non-sort of predicates, etc., right?
Yes, but how does that not make it to where, again, I'm going back to that reductio argument that I really want you to engage with, and not just say it's like you're just attacking the implication but not attacking the argument itself. I'm attacking the argument by drawing out its implication. Let me finish. If it is the case that essence, I didn't mean to be rude there. I want to get this.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. Fine.
Yeah, that's right. But if essence and person are really distinct, or if essence and subsistence are really distinct, that's obviously subsistence and person are the same thing, but I'm using subsistence to try and make this clear. If essence and subsistence are really distinct, that would mean that it is not God's essence to subsist in these three ways.
Yeah, but again, you're just going back to this other assertion that we just talked to, and we already established how you.
Your argument results in making God. Your argument results in making God contingent.
I know, but as I said previously, that's quite frankly the implication. That's the conclusion that my argument gives. Yes, right. But you're not actually tackling the argument itself. You already brought this earlier.
But it's not an argument.
Let me finish real quick. Let me finish. You already brought this argument. You already brought this previously to me, and I already said, well, that's kind of just invalid here. You're simply just showing an implication of the actual argument, rather than attacking why the argument is flawed and why this just simply cannot follow. But this would have to result in you justifying how this distinguishing feature does not account for a real distinction, which you have yet to do, right? You already gave some objections, I addressed them, and then you just went back to this, which has already been addressed, right? You're just begging the question, just restating this previous argument that has already been put aside, right? You can't just attack this conclusion and say, well, that just entails that God is contingent. Yes, that's kind of the whole point. But why does this argument
only if you would say that the essence and person are really distinct, but we say the persons are the essence, therefore there is no contingency.
What did you say?
We say the essence and the persons are not really distinct, materially speaking, therefore there is no contingency.
Yes, but I'm contending that fact. I'm saying, well, there is a distinguishing feature. There is something which distinguishes them. So this identity statement, insofar as there's no real distinction between person and essence, would just be invalid for the reasons I have given.
I don't see why you're not getting the point. If it's not God's essence to subsist under the relations of paternity, filiation, relation, under your model, only when we posit, as you say, a real distinction between person and essence, only under that would it mean that there is contingency in God, because he does not exist. He does not of his essence exist. In other words, it would make it to where there's a possible world in which God does not exist at all, or to where God exists in some other way.
I get that. But I don't know why you keep making an appeal to my model, because as I've already stated, my model asserts a Unitarian God insofar as there's one person, and this one person's essence is identical to its existence. So obviously we can say whatever is predicated of this one person is also predicated of the existence or essence. Thus, an identity statement is valid, and there is nothing to actually distinguish the essence and person here. But I'm saying that according to you, that is just something, according to your model of Trinitarianism, that is just invalid for the reasons I have already given. You can't assert an identity statement between the modes of subsistence, i.e. the persons, and the essence for the reason of this distinguishing feature. Again, you cannot attack this implication and say, well, it just results in a contingent God, because that's kind of like a no-brainer. That's the whole point according to your theology. According to your theology, if the persons are modes of subsistence, then yes, that does grant an essence-person distinction, right? And that's essentially what I'm proving, but you're not really attacking my proof. You're just
Yes, I
going
am.
against its conclusion. No, you're not. If you're going to actually properly attack my proof, you're going to say why this distinguishing feature does not account for real distinction, or why I'm flawed in my actual argumentation in itself, not its conclusion or its implication.
Okay, once again, by real distinction, do you mean material or formal?
I mean, what is actually in reality? We can distinguish the persons in reality from the essence. Obviously, there's a formal distinction insofar as their definition is not the same. That's fine, right? Because an intentional context, not an extensional context. Substitutivities of identical is not evident here because there's still this definitional distinction between them.
Could you say that last part again? You're talking kind of quick.
I'm saying that it's fine because I'm saying that it's not something definitional. I'm speaking about what's in reality that distinguishes them. Hence why I'm saying that there must be a real distinction. And a real distinction involves a distinction in reality.
It's material identity.
Yeah, I'm saying that it's just invalid to show an identity statement insofar as there's no real distinction. Yes.
Okay, so I mean, I'm trying to understand your point here. I don't get it because I'm saying I don't know why. What exactly is your argument on this point? Because it feels like we've moved from what your original argument was in the DMs to what we're talking about now.
I know because I know, but because no offense, you kind of like accepted my arguments, but then for some reason you attacked it. I know. No, you like you didn't like directly accept it or concede to it, but like you just like put it aside, and then for some reason you just attacked its implication as if it just shows why my argument is invalid, which that's already been established that can't really do that, and I showed why that's invalid to do. But I already gave my argument many times. You saw the modus tollens thing. No offense, but if you're up on the stage, I expect you know my argument, and I've already said it multiple times.
I did.
I think a lot of people understand it. So, like, all I'm asking is that you could just address it.
No, what you said. You know what you said was that that person in essence. That my point was that under your model of the Trinity, this would mean that God is contingent, and you're saying, yeah, that's the point. What do you mean that's the point? That's something.
I'm saying that according to you, if they are just modes of subsistence and it would entail some sort of existence essence distinction, then yeah, that's kind of the conclusion. You're just showing the point of the argument, what it concludes, but you're not saying why the argument in itself is invalid. I already showed you what you have to do to show why the argument is invalid and why this conclusion and this whole entire thing just wouldn't be what's in reality, right? Because you have to show why this distinguishing feature doesn't actually distinguish the persons in essence, which, by the way, you failed to do. You didn't give anything you didn't bring anything forth on the table to show why that's not the case. But you have to do something of that sort to justify this identity statement. But I'm showing how the identity statement is not justified because we can still derive a real distinction in the manner I've given. I've already shown the argument and everything. I'm not going to restate it 1,000 times.
Okay, fine. I guess, I mean, my point is that the relations, they're not accidental. I mean, this would only apply.
That's not the point.
This would apply. Your argument would apply if we're talking about creatures in which relations are accidental and they do not exist necessarily in those creatures. At least predicamental relations, not transcendental relations.
But that still wouldn't matter here because these relations in themselves are just intrinsic properties which account for real distinction. Aquinas doesn't negate that you can really distinguish things via their intrinsic property. I already gave you this quote, and I already explained the quote. I know, but I'm just saying why this whole thing of them being accidental or not is just, or them being necessary or not, is just something trivial. Because nonetheless, they still do account for real distinction. That's my argument here. Whether they're accidental or not is not really the main point, right? The whole main point is how we distinguish things and what constitutes a real distinction. And according to Aquinas, what constitutes a real distinction is still evident in the necessary existence. As he says, the real distinction is constituted via a lack of intrinsic property. That's why he corrects people who distinguish via way of act rather than way of form. And obviously, we can really distinguish people in the same manner in creatures, right? That's no issue, except we might just use accidents to distinguish, while Aquinas uses the constitutive property to distinguish. Hence why I'm saying this is just a trivial point.
Okay, so are you basically saying that sense with regard to affirmation and negation, because I believe Aquinas discusses your exact ejection just with different terminology. Are you basically saying that since we've conceded, we basically conceded or at least granted that yes, the relations are the properties, but said even then, that still doesn't solve the issue because the relations are not identical to each other?
Yeah, I'm saying that the relations, like so I can't say that paternity, so according to you, obviously the properties of the persons are just identical to the essence. But you can't say that the properties, paternity or filiation, like paternity can't be identical to the son because it's obviously something opposed, right?
Yes.
And I'm saying, well, then the essence has this property of paternity via identity. Thus, we can distinguish the essence and son in this manner, right? That's essentially what I'm saying here.
We can distinguish them formally since the term essence and the term filiation have different connotations. They have different definitions as terms.
Yeah, sure, we can distinguish them formally, but also materially here, because we can show a material distinction here between father and son via this relation here, and I'm simply just applying this relation not to the father here, but to the essence as an identity statement. Likewise, with how we do with the father, and and a distinction would still be evident between persons. But I'm also just simply applying this same methodology to the essence and person here. So it would be something material and formal, you could assert, but it's also something material in reality, as I already displayed.
Okay, so
Listen,
but
yeah,
saying that all right. What were you gonna say? I'm sorry.
I'm just gonna say, like, I don't want to like offend you or anything, but
I'm not offended.
I don't. I know. I don't like
I
think.
just can't understand your point and why it feels like we're
I get
talking
it.
past each other, and I'm trying
I
to
get it.
get
But like,
you to
no
understand this.
offense. I'm just like, I don't mean to offend you. I swear. Well, I don't mean to offend you. But I'm just saying, it just feels like you came like ill prepared a little bit, right? Because you're going all over the place. You went back to the implication thing. You went back to the whole properties being identical thing. Aquinas answered this. It's just a lot of restating, a lot of me answering. You put this answer aside, but then you just go back to some other point we spoke to 20 minutes ago. Hence why I'm just concluding that you're just ill prepared for this discussion. Right? No
Okay,
offense. I already said I'm not. I don't
is
mean to
what you're
offend you.
saying is what you're saying basically that the essence and person must be really distinct because they're things that can be affirmed of the persons but denied of the essence, such as the relations being opposed from each other.
Yeah, so obviously the properties are identical to the essence, but this property of paternity is not identical to the person, the son, but it's identical to the essence.
Okay,
Thus, a distinguishing feature arises.
now we're getting somewhere because if I remember
That's been my
correctly,
main argument.
I think Reginald Garrigou Lagrange addresses this excuse me, I misspoke there. This exact objection. What he says is that, and I'll just quote what he says here. He says the divine persons are distinguished from the essence, just as the divine attributes are distinguished from one another, and this is sufficient so that something may be affirmed of the essence and denied of the persons. For example, we say that the essence is communicable, but paternity is not communicable, just as mercy is the principle of forgiveness and justice is not. So if we have that kind of formal distinction, something may be affirmed of the persons, such as, paternity is not identical to relation because, like he said, you're right, there's that relation of opposition, which in relations by definition, for example, in paternity, father and son cannot be identical. Otherwise, there would be no relation anymore. But that doesn't mean that we can't say anything or that doesn't mean that there must be a real distinction between essence and person, because the kind of distinction we have defined between person and essence is similar to the distinction between the individual divine attributes. That means we can still affirm something of the persons but denied of the essence, but that does not mean that there's a real distinction between person
Yeah,
and
I
essence.
wanted to contend this quote here because obviously, if you're going to speak of the persons in essence, that which distinguishes the person is actually a minor virtual distinction. But actually, that which
No, it's a
distinguishes
real
the
distinction.
attributes.
It's a real
No,
distinction which distinguishes
I'm
the
saying
person.
between persons and essence. Sorry, between
Oh,
the essence and
persons.
person is a minor virtual distinction. But that which distinguishes
You
the
misspoke.
attributes. Yeah, I'm sorry, that's my fault. I mean, I said a little bit. I said something ambiguous. But
Go ahead.
between the attributes here, it's a major virtual distinction. So obviously, we don't distinguish them in the same manner. That would just be flawed here. And what this quote says, obviously, I'm going to contend to because it's something flawed. Right? A major virtual distinction would be in the case that obviously there's only a conceptual distinction strictly between the attributes. Right? There's only a conceptual distinction in God, but we can still
Well,
distinguish them qua effects in reality. This is a major
Henry
virtual
Grenier
distinction. Does
discusses.
not violate divine subjectivity.
I
But
believe Grenier. Go ahead. Never mind.
yeah, but in the case of a minor logical distinction between essence and person, it just simply means that these concepts implicitly include one another, like substance and being is an example of a minor virtual distinction, right? But
Yes.
nonetheless, that still doesn't really address how this distinguishing feature, right, between essence and person, like that doesn't account for real distinction, because obviously the attributes, they don't have these intrinsic properties which can account for distinction between them. Rather, what actually can account for distinction between them is something conceptual, i.e., by their definition, right? Hence why we don't assert an absolute identity statement or a purely logical identity or a purely logical distinction, because there's still this definition here that might distinguish them. So that's why we're also able to show a major virtual distinction qua effect, right? So essentially, this quote here doesn't really like address anything, right? It's just speaking of something formal and not speaking of something material.
No,
And
what
or
it's
just
saying is
restating this.
no. I asked you to clarify what your objection was, and your objection was that person and essence must be really distinguished because we can affirm something of the persons and deny something of the essence, and vice versa. That was what you said your objection was.
Yes.
I asked you to clarify that.
And
Yes, but
essentially, the quote
still
you
do
gave.
that under. We can still do that under formal distinction, though.
I know, but the quote you gave is not really addressing what's actually in reality, but rather what's in their definition, and it just asserts a minor logical distinction, which sure, that's fine, but I'm speaking about what's in reality. I already gave you the example of how he's speaking of the attributes, them being majorly a major virtual distinction being implemented here, right? I already gave you this example. So he's not necessarily speaking about my objection here, and he doesn't really address it properly. Because if he were to address it properly, he'd show how this relation of paternity and filiation account for real distinction, but yet the essence has it by identity. Yet how wouldn't that account for real distinction between person and essence, right? That's not really addressing this quote. It's just showing something via definition and essentially just how you would derive a minor logical distinction between essence and person. And he makes a connection between the major virtual distinction of the attributes. So it's not really anything. It's not really bringing anything to the table here.
What do you mean? I've heard the term major virtual distinction, but I bet I've heard it in different ways. What do you mean by that here?
Yeah, I defined it. I already defined it, but I'll define it again. It just simply means that these concepts, can exist apart, separate from each other. So, for example, you have all these attributes in God. They're obviously identical to God in each other. But what this quote is saying is that there is a major virtual distinction, right? Well, at least that's what he's saying. The distinguishing feature between the attributes. It's obviously a conceptual distinction in God. There's nothing to really distinguish them in God, but we can still distinguish them qua effects. So this is the foundation in reality. It's just a minor logical distinction, but to be more specific, a major virtual distinction. So we can split up a minor logical distinction into major virtual and minor virtual. And in the case of attributes, it's a major virtual distinction, but in the case of essence and person, it's a minor virtual distinction.
Yes, right. I agree. It's a minor virtual distinction. We've already established that.
Yeah.
So again, I feel like at this point we're just talking past each other. I don't know how you can't see the point that if you say that person and essence are really distinct, that means that God is contingent. And I know you say that's not the argument; that's just an implication. I don't think it matters, because if it's an implication that necessarily follows from your argument, that would mean that your argument is flawed. Because you wouldn't concede that God is contingent, and neither would I.
Oh, but listen, okay, I guess this is like the conclusions now. But I already said, right, that this whole thing appealing to my implications will not necessarily be something coherent here, because I am still justified in making an identity statement between existence and essence. Why? Because whatever is predicated of this one person that I believe is also predicated of the existence and essence. Thus, I am justified in this identity statement, and there's nothing to distinguish them in reality. But I've already given the case that there are three persons here, and that there is something to distinguish the modes of subsistence with the essence. So according to you, this implication would have to be established. Simply showing why it would just show some sort of absurdity is kind of just begging the question and just restating my argument. Yeah, that's kind of the whole point here.
Okay, what is the opposition that distinguishes person and essence?
I already gave that. It's the relations. Right, because obviously the relations are something identical to the persons, or the relations, these intrinsic properties or relations of the persons are also identical to the essence, as well as the persons they are set of. But these, like paternity, for example, is not identical to the Son. But as you said, we're kind of just going around in circles. Like, I've already restated this argument 1,000 times. You attempted to give some response. I objected to them. Like, I don't really know what's there left. Like, there's nothing really left.
Yeah, me neither.
All right, so does this conclude the debate? Do you guys want to do a Q&A or something? Joe, you're fine with that?
I'm fine with doing a Q&A, sure.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Wa alaikum assalam.
So everyone in the stage, there's sometimes a glitch where you cannot raise your hand. If you wanna, ask a question, if you wanna come up on stage, ping me, let me know so I can drag you up. Or if you don't wanna use your voice or talk, you can ping me with your, make sure to include who the question is for and what's the question. And yeah, that's how it will go, inshallah. Make sure to ping though. By the way, I'm expecting like basically no questions because it's a really deep topic and I don't think anyone can,
I mean, it's kind of like a, it is like a kind of a deep topic. It's just kind of a pretty narrow topic here. I mean, maybe there might be some questions.
I saw people in the chat getting lost.
Yeah, some people were probably lost, and I do kind of speak a little fast too. It's my fault. Some people were commenting on that.
I know.
It's like an Arab thing.
Seriously.
Yeah, it's like an Arab thing. I guess it's like an Arab thing. It's Arab, speak fast and stuff like that. It's my fault.
Okay. Neutral questions.
Ask me some questions, guys. Like a question.
Yeah, I think most of the questions would go to Matt Hedges anyways.
Like, we're literally 90% of the questions I just saw were literally just troll questions.
Well, I don't know if there are any questions. But...
Okay, so Flame. Remember, it has to be on topic, and yeah, Flame. I think he has a question. I'm not sure. He wants to be on stage.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just interested to know, like, how will Matt justify that Jesus is intrinsically, like, knowing that he's God, or how does he justify the intrinsic, like, essence being, like,
So you're
for him?
asking how does Christ know he's God?
Yeah, intrinsically.
Okay. Well, God,
Sorry,
God
sorry.
has a God. By the way, it's awesome to talk to a PhD. Thank you for coming. But God has a knowledge of simple intelligence whereby he knows his own essence, and through that he also knows all possibilities. So Christ as God has that knowledge of simple intelligence, and that how he knows his own essence, and obviously through knowing his own essence he knows he's God because his essence is his deity.
You done?
That's a
Yeah,
trick
I
Yeah.
question.
mean, I'm not debating. I'm not debating
Yeah.
him.
Yeah, I know. Sorry. There was a question by Apollo, a good friend of mine. He said, "How is Jad taking person like in essence to be?" And according to, I'm going to answer this via Thomistic theology. I don't know if you missed the debate here, but according to Thomistic theology, we'd say that the persons are something which are just modes of subsistence, and the essence is just the divine nature which they are all set of. For example, if you make the assertion that the Father is God, the statement of is God would just be by virtue of identity, and this identity would be towards the essence. So person and essence, i.e. the modes of subsistence, are just identical to that one essence. Thus, we can conclude existence is identical to essence according to Thomistic theology. Here we go. He's saying, do you know each other? Just shut the fuck up.
Do we know each other?
By the way, Paul, this is Beetlejuice. I'm talking to Apollo. Okay, but yeah, that concludes that question. If you guys have any more questions, go ahead.
I figured we'd have more. It looks like we have a bigger audience here than from last night.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
something like
as
that.
I said, Matt, it's because it's a really deep topic. No one really like fully grasps it, so there's not many questions, except like from people who would understand.
Yeah. Okay. So, are we going to end the stage, or is there more questions being made here?
Someone just pinged me. How do you Someone Crusader asked me, "How do you verify you exist to even make that claim about God?" What claim is he referring to
Listen,
specifically?
he's a troll. He's a
It's
troll.
a troll. It's a troll question.
Oh,
He's a troll.
well, I'm not a Cartesian. I haven't really studied Descartes a ton, but obviously, I think therefore I am is a valid statement. But
Yeah,
I'm not.
according to Thomistic
I'm not.
theology, I think it also makes sense.
I'm not endorsing Descartes though, because I know that I've heard
Well, I
he's
mean,
had some.
Aquinas would probably follow the same epistemology of rationalism to Descartes, so you'd obviously think this axiom is valid. But nonetheless, that's not really like the topic, so he was just asking a troll question.
I read something yesterday that said he like denied all causality or something like that. But Texas Ill Conceived asks, "Why are you running from debating me?" Well, for one reason, I did give you the offer to debate, and I was in VC, and you were challenging and barking about it. But then when I came to VC, you said I have to have 10 more minutes so I can get home.
Who are you talking to?
This guy named Texas Ill Conceived. I think he's that atheist, that jihadist.
Yeah, he's likewise a troll. Don't entertain him.
He was just a guy that barked in VC for some reason, or growled. Excuse me, growled, not barked.
Yeah, no, he actually growled. Like, I'm not even joking.
Yeah,
like he was like, "Arr!"
Yeah, atheist. I don't even know what to say about these kind of people.
Yeah, he's a troll. Don't entertain. He's just gonna like you'll speak to him no matter what you say. He's just gonna call you like a retard. You're stupid. You don't know logic. You're a moron. I had to teach you on logic. Stuff like that.
Yeah.
He's just gonna.
I love it. If he wants to come up to the stage right now and we can discuss the existence of God briefly, then that's fine. But I don't know if everyone really wants to listen to that because I don't think everyone wants to listen to growling, as you said. So
I mean, maybe you guys can go up to like this VC down.
No, I
Yeah. Like
think
I'm
that
being
should
serious.
be scheduled
We'll
later.
interrupt. Yeah, or you could just do like if you want to speak to him so badly, if you guys actually want to speak to each other, just maybe not on a stage, but down in the VC below.
Yeah.
yeah, I wouldn't give him a stage anyway. I don't.
Okay, so 1 second, Matt. There's a question to Jad that it says, did you say something about minor intrinsic distinction between essence and attributes? If yes,
Yeah,
then let me finish the question. If
I
yes,
see it, man.
if yes, then I'm reading for the audience. Come on, calm down.
There we go.
And did you say something about minor intrinsic distinction between essence and attributes? If yes, then can you expand? Question mark. Go.
Okay, I don't know if he's referring to me saying a real distinction or the minor virtual distinction. But yeah, between the essence and person, according to Thomistic theology, there's just a minor virtual distinction. And a minor virtual distinction is a kind of minor logical distinction, which states that the persons, or which states that two concepts include each other implicitly. And an example of this would be being, the concept being, and the concept substance. They are minor logically distinct.
Okay, I hope that answers your question. Usual rock.
Are we responding to each other's answers to the questions, or just?
You can add your own answer
No,
if you
it's
want.
kidding.
It's open.
Yeah, I was kind of reading about the whole issue of being and substance yesterday. I think I do hold to probably Cardinal Cajetan's position against Scotus, which is that being signifies the 10 categories, like, substance, quantity, quality, etc. It signifies them immediately. There's nothing mediate between being and the categories.
Hence a minor logical distinction.
And nothing real, like, to mediate that.
Yeah.
Just read his commentary on being an essence from Thomas. Cardinal Cajetan was a great commentator on
Yeah. By the way, this thing of the minor logical distinction between concept of being and concepts of substance is founded in Scholastic Metaphysics by Facer. Pretty good read.
Someone asked me why I believe in God, but I don't. That's not really the topic.
Yeah.
Okay, someone asked me a real question here. If it's Judgment Day and Christianity comes out to be the true religion, and then Jesus asks you to choose between Jad and jihadists, on whom would you say from eternal torment? Bad spelling. Which one would you choose? No, only one. You can't choose both.
The hell?
I don't. There'd probably be so many people there that I wouldn't see them. But
What is this kind of? What is this question?
yeah, I think this guy's. I don't know. He's trying to set me up.
Just ignoring him.
No, I don't know. I would hope that both of them could be saved.
Can I give a quick shout out? I want to shout out my boy Aloushi. Jarib Aloushi. That's where he comes from, Aloushi.
I don't really have anyone to shout out. I kind of have a tough crowd here.
Shout out Antonio.
Yeah, but he's a papist, so he's not really a Christian. But...
Oh, damn. Wait, what? Oh, shit.
Yeah, by the way, Jad, I think I sent you a link to that book by Garrett Lagrange. Did you get it, or did I forget to send it?
What? Wait, book about what?
It was called Okay, I didn't send it. I meant to send you that book from Garrett Lagrange that I quoted. It's called Trinity and God the Creator. It's a commentary on prima pars.
Oh, yeah, I just got it. I have a question from Jihadist. Joe, should I read that or what?
Excuse me, was I pinged?
Yeah, he pinged us. He said, "Why do you think Christians constantly struggle with addressing the fact that their beliefs on ADS is a massive self-inflicted hole in their theology? Do you think Aquinas was aware and merely tried to waffle it away, or is it more so Aquinas recognized the problem and tried to reconcile it to others, examining theirs directly?" Well, obviously, it is kind of evident in his Stone with Theologica that he did receive many objections to his thing of ADS. In fact, the reason why he makes the assertion that all these properties are identical to the persons and what they're identical and the essence was because of an objection that was said of ADS and simplicity. Basically said, how can simplicity be if there are these properties, whatever? And he just said, well, no, they're just identical to the persons and to the essence. So he does try to reconcile some of these issues, but obviously he didn't really get to a lot of them, and I would say some of them, the way he reconciled them may have not really been in the best manner. But yeah. Hope that answers the question. Matt, there's a question to you, by the way. Are you a Mysterian?
What the heck is a Mysterian?
Apollo
I've
asked.
never heard of a Mysterian.
Apollo asks, "Can the Father be God without the Son? If not, would that not insinuate a form of restriction?" I think I know the answer to that, but I'm not really the Christian here or the Trinitarian. You can. I don't know if Matt Hedges wants to. I don't know who this is even directed towards.
Yeah. What is a? I've never heard of a Mysterian before.
Yeah, to answer Apollo's question, some Christians make a bicondition between the Father and the Son. So obviously the Father cannot be God without the Son, and the Son cannot be God without the Father. So it's a counterfactual dependency relation, or a counterfactual dependency, which is just a logical dependence relation, not an ontological one. Not everyone makes this assertion, by the way. But that's just like one way they could address it. But you can just ask Matt Hedges because he's the actual Trinitarian here. I don't really know his position on that exactly. But I just gave one position out of many.
What was the question? I didn't hear it. I wasn't really paying attention. I was talking about.
Can the Father be God without the Son? If not, would that not insinuate a form of restriction?
No, the Father cannot be God without the Son because being a Father implies that there is a Son. And to say that the Father could be God without the Son would seem, at least from my perspective, to imply that they have a different essence, which is the Arian heresy. And I talked about this in my debate. That was my whole point about the issue of essence and subsistence, is that since God has these three subsistencies, these three subsisting relations, if they're not identical to him, then that would mean that God is contingent.
Alright.
I deny evolution for whoever just asked. I don't believe it exists. It's a myth.
Saint Sauer.
Shout out to Pure Light and Potentia.
Pure Light's a papist. Not actually, I don't know.
No, I thought he was. Oh yeah, Pure Light is, but
I actually don't know if it really is. But there's a question to you, Matt. Are the hypostatic properties necessary?
yes, in the sense that they're identical to God and God is necessary. So yeah, I mean they're not contingent. If they were contingent, that would mean that there's a world in which God is not a Trinity or something like that. That would be absurd. Yeah, I would say, like, on face value, I would say yes, but I would want to know more about what he means specifically because I don't want to say anything that would lead to heresy or anything like that. So if you could clarify, that'd be great. But you can do that another time or now. I don't really care. Someone asked me how is the hypostatic union divinely simple and coherent. Well, in the hypostatic union, at least with regards to divine simplicity, the hypostatic union, the person of the Son is composed in the sense that there are two numerical things, not in the sense that Christ is a tertium quid, because that would mean that would be the monophysite idea that Christ is a third thing out of two or something like that. But in terms of the divine nature, of course, that's simple, and Christ is the divine nature. Christ is God. So yeah, with Christ, the person of Christ in regard of the divine nature is simple. Yes.
The hell? Alright, Okay, Matt, there's a question from an anonymous person. They don't want me to say their name. So basically, you accept relative identity, right? Like the persons are relatively identical to the essence, I presume, right? Because this is what this person thinks, right?
Sorry, say it again.
So you accept a statement of relative identity between the persons in essence, right?
In the sense that like the Father is the same essence as the Son, yes, in that
Yeah,
sense.
like
And
it's just
I don't know
relative,
if
it's
I
not
would.
absolute.
I don't know if I'd buy into everything that people like Michael Rhea and like other relative identity.
Maybe a different, maybe you hold to some thesis of relative identity, but yeah. So this person is saying, basically, PSR is the notion that everything has an explanation, and we know that identity under Leibnizian's model has an explanation, meaning why A is identical to B. Well, because it shares every predicate and property, meaning no distinction, hence identical, but under relative identity, something could be identical without sharing every predicate and property, hence PSR violates. It's unexplained how A equals B under relative identity. Basically saying that there is really no metaphysical account, and that violates, there is no metaphysical account for identity under relative identity, and that violates PSR, because it would assert that there is no reason as to why things are identical, which would be contrary to that of absolute identity, which states that things are identical because they don't lack a property from one another. So
I think he's using PSR inconsistently. I could use that exact same thing to say that there must be a reason why God possesses the attribute of aseity. I mean, what are you going to give something prior to God or something additional to God to account for that? That would mean that aseity is an accidental property. The same thing would apply to the relations. So his objection would only apply if the relations were predicamental and accidental. I mean, we classify it as a predicamental relation, but it's not an accidental relation because the relations are the essence. But it would only, so his statement would only apply if the relations are accidental. That's when there would need to be something other than the divine essence, other than the relations, to account for that statement of identity.
Well, according to this person, anonymous, God is a deity, hence self-explanation. So essentially, God is just self-explained. He's not a brute fact.
Okay.
That's what anonymous said. This anonymous person said. He doesn't want me to say so. Okay. Question, I think, to Matt Hedges. If the hypostatic properties are necessary, how can it be lacked by the person, like the Father doesn't have begottenness that the Son has?
What is it? I can't understand. You have to talk louder.
Sorry. If the hypostatic properties are necessary, how can it be lacked by the person, like the Father doesn't have begottenness that the Son has? This is from Saint Sauer, by the way.
Okay, so yeah. Hi, Saint Sauer. Good to see you again. The reason why the relations are not identical to each other is because, by definition, they're relations of opposition. So a relation cannot be identical to its correlative term. So paternity cannot be identical to the Son because the Son is the correlative term of paternity. So that's why they cannot be identical.
Okay. Okay, we have something from Anonymous again. I think this goes back to the PSR. Yeah, I think it does. So he said, so answer the objection, and how did I use PSR wrongly? Since I just showed your example as followed. And I think he's referring to your aseity thing, where he just said that God is just self-explained.
My point is that I could say the exact same thing, that God is necessarily I said earlier that they're necessary and that there's not a possible world in which God would not exist the way that he does, because God is not composed of essence and existence. It is his essence to exist as the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Okay, he asked, what relevance does that bear to the argument?
What relevance?
Which is the argument of PSR.
Argument of PSR. I already explained that the PSR would only apply, at least in the way that he's taking it, it would only apply here if the relations were accidental. If the relations were accidental, then there would need to be something to account for that identity statement. But there doesn't need to be, because in God there are no accidents. There's only substance and relation.
Are you fine if he responds? He's speaking.
How long does he want to keep doing this? Like,
I don't know. He's anonymous. He doesn't like want to think.
Okay.
He can. We'll, give a few more. He said the argument doesn't assume anything accidental. You simply are confused on my objection, unfortunately.
I know he's not saying the relations are accidental. He's asking for in terms of PSR, what grounds that identity statement. I'm saying there doesn't need to be something other than the divine essence to ground it. I can say that it's because that is who God is. He exists as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, just like in the same way that you can say that God is Ase.
Well, how do you know he's not an atheist? Actually, I don't
know
even know his belief. I don't know his belief. Well, actually, I don't think he's an atheist. He's in PSI. He's typing, so.
I'm gonna go get some water.
There's still a question, or there's still this thing from the anonymous guy, so I'll just wait until my Hedges gets back. I don't know what to tell him.
Wait, can you tell me who that guy is?
Sure. Actually, I don't know if he's fine with it. Actually, I'll do it. I don't think he wants it to be public.
Let's move to general.
Oh wait, this guy still has an objection.
Oh my word.
Yeah, we're just waiting for Matt to come back.
All right, I'm back.
Yeah. This anonymous guy said. This anonymous guy said.
Who is it? Why does he want to be anonymous? This is kind
That's
of
I actually have no idea, but he just said be anonymous. I'll respect his request.
okay.
That's re-explaining your position. If Sun is identical to Essence relatively, then what accounts for their identity?
Could you say that again?
Okay. That's re-explaining your position. If Sun is identical to Essence relatively, then what accounts for their identity?
Because of the divine simplicity, the fact that all that is in God other than the persons is one. All that is in God is God. So it's because of the divine simplicity that the Son is the essence.
Right.
Did he get that?
Yeah, he's typing.
Of course he is.
That's question begging. I asked for an account, and you just stated the thing in question because Sun is the essence.
No, he didn't even hear me. I said because of the divine simplicity. That's the account. That's why person and essence are identical. And of course, also the reductio argument I gave earlier. But I don't think that's what he has in mind. So yes, the reason why the Son is the divine essence is because of the divine simplicity of God.
The guy wants to be anonymous, by the way, Elijah. So I don't think he'd accept a stage. And I don't think he'd voice himself out. But it is kind of turning into a discussion. It's a Q&A, so I mean, like
No,
if you can wrap things
that's my
up.
point. I'm happy to answer his question, but
Yeah, I don't know if this guy's willing to. Okay, simplicity is just a notion that they're identical. So you were just stating the account for why sun is identical to the essence. It's because it's identical to the essence. This is silly.
no, divine simplicity is a broader thing than the specific issue of the persons in essence. Divine simplicity is one concept, and then the concept of the persons being identical to the essence is another. The latter is contained in the former. So divine simplicity is not exactly the same thing as saying that the persons are identical to the essence. Saying that the persons are identical to the essence is an entailment and follows from divine simplicity. But divine simplicity simplicator is not the same thing as saying that the sun is the essence.
I don't know if he has another response. Can you just wrap things up, man? Right there. Divine simplicity academically is the notion that anything in eternal is identical to God. So once again, give an account to the identity of the sun and the essence, give explicability. If you cannot, then I think this should be wrapped up. Okay, listen, he literally stated he anonymous. He stated he can't give one, mainly due to his objection. Perhaps we can just wrap things up right here and continue this in chat or in the VC if you'd like. Because I don't think he has any more. Okay.
You don't think he has any more what?
I said he already made a response. Basically, divine simplicity academically is the notion that anything eternal is identical to God. So once again, give an account to the identity of the sun and the essence, give explicability. If you cannot, then I think that should be wrapped up. But like I don't know, this is just getting repetitive, you know. And
So now he's trying to question divine simplicity. I think that's what he's trying to do. So I would make another reductio argument. If God is not simple, then that would mean he's dependent on his attributes. So that would violate his aseity, because if one of these attributes did not exist, God would no longer be God. Or if we're going to say that God is not simple, then who was it that composed the parts that make up God, so to speak? Because it couldn't have been God, because God exists through these
he
parts.
said no. He said no. He said no. He said no. Dude,
No,
this is annoying. I'm like a messenger between you two. Like
no what?
I don't know. He just says no.
You can't just say no. That doesn't refute.
I don't know. He probably like has like an explanation or something. I don't know.
I just gave him two reductio arguments for divine simplicity. I could obviously there's a lot more I can go into, and I would suggest if he wants to learn more about it, he should come to the Scholastic Renaissance course that's being held on it pretty soon.
Damn. Right. He's typing, by the way.
Of course he is. He's just
What'd
gonna
you
say
say?
no. He's gonna say no again and act like that's an argument.
He said, "You gave a proof by contradiction on why IDS is true when I never questioned or denied it. This is moronic."
He never questioned whether divine simplicity is true.
Yeah, he said you gave a proof by contradiction on why IDS is true when I never questioned or denied it. This is moronic.
Okay, then his original objection is gone, because I said the divine simplicity is the reason why the persons and the essence are identical. If this guy wants to talk to me, ask him to message me personally.
Well, he's in the audience, I'm pretty sure. He's
Yeah, I
in the
just don't
audience.
know who it is.
He said define ADS. Bro, this is so repetitive. Like oh my god. He said define ADS.
absolute divine simplicity in particular?
Yeah, just ADS, absolute divine.
Okay, God is his attributes, and his attributes are materially identical to each other, but formally different. I'm not necessarily saying I buy into everything that Duns Scotus said about the formal distinction, by the way, in case anyone thought that, because even Thomistic writers acknowledge this type of distinction. For example, Henry Grenier, in Volume 2 of his book on Thomistic philosophy. So that's how I would summarize it briefly. God is his attributes. The attributes are the essence, and the attributes are materially identical to each other.
Anonymous, do you have any thoughts? Here we go.
Again, I'm tired of doing this. If he wants, I'm happy to talk to him or her, whoever this is. I mean, obviously, those are the only two options. But if he wants to talk to me, what he can do is he can message me personally in DMs.
Alright, he said, so ADS under paradigm is the notion that God equals his attributes and persons, right? That's what he asked. That's what she asked. I think it's a she. She said, it's a she, by the way. So ADS under his paradigm is the notion that God equals his attributes and persons, right?
That if he's saying that, or if she is saying.
By the way, it's a she him. It's a she him. Like that's her him pronouns. I don't know. Him.
Wait, hold on. Did you say that
Wait,
he has his?
What the fuck is
Wait,
going
hold on a second. Hold on. Okay, hold on a second. This person wants to criticize me about the Trinity, but yet thinks they're both a guy and a girl.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, I'm done talking to him. To him, her, they, these, or I don't know.
Oh my god.
Stupid. Yeah, I'll just say this as a rule of thumb. Anytime I see pronouns in someone's bio, it's an automatic deduction of IQ points.
She, he, whatever said, I am a Trinity in a sense.
No, you're not, because the Trinity only applies to God.
Here we go.
Nice
okay,
try.
can I just end the stage? Please, can I just end the stage? Like, no more.
Yeah, this is
I gotta end.
Sure.
Okay,
Yeah, just end the stage, bro.
Guys, if you wanna like chit chat, there's a general VC. We can go there. I'll end the stage right now. God bless. Big thanks to Matthew, obviously, and Jad for debating. It's a beautiful debate and obviously respectful. And yeah, God bless all of you.
Yeah, definitely better than last night.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
He's the thing and it's opposite.
Okay.
Yep.
Yo, Matt Hedges won. Matt Hedges W. Jad, you lost. Not gonna lie, Jad.
Good job.
Antonio, you little
Wait,
bitch.
is that Majestic? Who
Hey
is
Matt,
that?
hey Matt.
Oh my god.
Hey, Jed. Jed.
Yo,
Hey Matt,
Good job, brother. Good job.
Hey Matt.
thank you.
Welcome. That was a really interesting debate.
Yeah, I liked
I
it.
just-
It was definitely.
The only part I didn't understand, what is the logical dependency though? Like, I didn't understand that part yet.
That's not really like that was just part of the Q&A thing.
Yeah.
But like, when you said logical dependency,
It's
isn't
like
it a
two-way
real...
dependency. No, it's not a real dependence relation, so it's not ontological, so it wouldn't entail like ontological dependency or contingency in this manner.
Why would you, like, what were you using it then?
Oh no! You just asked me. Someone asked a question regarding that in the Q&A, and yeah.
No,
Yeah,
I
Jed,
just
thank
think I
you
just got lost.
Yeah, thank you again for the discussion. I would like to keep talking about this also in DMs as we keep
Yeah, no
going.
problem. Likewise.
Yeah. It was infinitely better than the discussion with Jihadist because he just kept spazzing out. But...
Alright.
You're also 2 points.
What?
Wait, why is Texas not
What?
muted? Crazy.
Yeah, I can talk to Matt if he's still there.
Wait, Texas, can you grr first again?
Matt, are you there?
Yeah, Matt is here.
Wait, can we do it in staff stage chat?
No, that's
Ugh, dude,
no. We
That'd be
can't.
better.
Texas does not deserve. Texas does not deserve chat.
So
Stage
people
chat.
can
not-
Wait, why are you angry or angrier at this point? Relax, actually. Two moods.
I
Relax.
don't want to, I don't feel like going back to stage.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
been-
No, Matthew, you're
Yeah,
right.
we're so tired. You know, we went
Oh my God.
upstairs. We cannot go.
Oh my
Listen.
God, it's almost like I can't talk here. Wait, listen, guys.
Texas
First
got
of all-
cooked by
first-
Jad.
Wait, listen. Yo, only two moods. Relax. Limited ass nigga. But
Dude,
look, what I'm
even
saying
Jihad
is
is destroyed Texas. Even Jihad is destroyed Texas.
Okay, so what I'm saying is, guys, stage should be something that is like, rare and fun. We can't just abuse it, to this extent. And then it's
Rare
only
and fun.
Thank you, Slimy.
Don't ever mute my boy Matthew.
Didn't Chalo like shit on you, Joe? Or
Yeah, exactly.
How?
Okay,
What dimension?
Okay, so I got up this morning.
In every possible world.
and four?
My
and
God,
four.
let them speak. Let them speak.
Four.
Alright, enough.
You're
Yeah,
just
so
gonna text,
what I
text
want-
it for a minute.
what
So
I'm-
basically, I got up this morning. Keep quiet. I got up this morning and I just searched my name in the server, and there's like 100 mentions over the debate last night.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, so I don't want to have the actual discussion. So what I want to know from you is what is the argument that God exists?
Bro, what?
Well, there's many different arguments for the
Yeah,
existence
just
of
give
God.
one.
Okay, first of all, if you're gonna do this, if you're gonna interrupt me every time I speak, I'm not gonna speak to you because you're already acting like an infant. So we can use different arguments for the existence of God. One that I guess, for the sake of discussion, we can talk about is the moral argument. I would argue that without
Sure.
God, you cannot have any objective morality, and so you cannot tell me that I'm being a bad debater right now because you don't have objective morals to say that.
So the argument is basically like if God does not exist, objective morality doesn't exist, and
That's
objective,
correct.
yeah,
That's
then
correct, and we
objective
can't make
morality
rational
does
moral.
exist. So God
We,
exists, right?
excuse me. You're already spoken out. You're already spoken out. But what I said was that
Very calm.
if
I'm
God
asking
does
you.
not if God does not exist, then what that would mean is that we can make moral judgments, but they don't have any epistemic foundation. And if we believe in PSR, just like we talked about, there's a reason why those moral judgments are true or false.
Yeah. So premise one.
By the way, one sec. I'm
Yeah,
gonna
I'll type
moderate.
out the argument.
I can hear Google.
I'll type out the argument in chat,
What's
and
the-
then just tell me if this is the argument you're trying to give.
I'm gonna
Alright,
moderate this
I
chat.
just had a question.
Yeah.
Wait.
Um,
I just
I'm not
had a
doing
question.
another
Why are people
2 hour
asking questions mid discussion? Wait, 1 second.
Yeah.
It's not a question and answer session. Chihuahua, look, and you're not a moderator. You're
Let
not
him go,
that
let
guy.
him go.
Yeah, I am
Yeah,
a
yeah, it's
VC
fine.
mod. That's my job.
Hey, wait 1 second. Okay, go ahead, Texas or Matt. Whoever.
Yeah. So Matt, is the argument you're giving the one I just posted in chat?
Okay, well, first of all, that wouldn't be my argument because that's not
Okay,
a valid.
yeah.
So, let me finish. That's not a valid
Okay.
argument. Let me finish. The reason why is because a premise cannot follow from, or excuse me, a conclusion cannot follow from two negative premises. That's one of the rules of a valid categorical syllogism. So I would ask, have you studied logic, like how to make syllogisms?
Matt, do you actually, okay, before we even go into this, I'm just going to ask you this. Do you want to die on the hill that this is not a deductively valid argument? Do you actually want to die on the hill?
Okay, it says, have you read any logic textbook?
Yeah, Matt, trust me, you don't want to die on this hill.
I'm not dying on any hill.
So, okay, to be clear, you're making the claim this is invalid, right?
A conclusion cannot follow from two negative premises.
All right, so what do you think the logical form is of this argument?
Okay, well, it depends. Was this a categorical syllogism or hypothetical syllogism?
What? No, I'm asking you the question I asked you. What is
No,
the form? Matt, I'm asking you what the form is.
If it wasn't a categorical syllogism, then fine, it's valid. That's okay. But if it was categorical, then it would be invalid.
You know what the form is, Matt?
The form is. Are you talking about AIEO propositions?
Okay, this guy has no idea what he's talking about. All right, so that's clear. So the form of this argument, this is modus tollens, right? So it's P implies Q. I'm not Q, therefore not P, right? That's just a valid inference rule. So you clearly have no idea what you're talking about when it comes to logic.
Okay, yes. If that's how you're formulating.
Good job. Now,
if that's how you're formulating, then I would say
you
that,
said
yes,
this is
that's
not
valid.
the argument you're giving, correct? So I want you to just tell me what the argument you're giving is.
No, I misunderstood you because I thought it was a categorical syllogism. But if it's not, that's fine. My argument is that yes. Let me finish. My argument is that objective morality, in order to be grounded, requires an objective moral standard, and only God can provide that sort of objective moral standard.
So how does that differ from the argument I just read out?
Did you hear anything I just said? I said I
Yeah,
misunderstood.
you said you said that
In terms of the argument you
morality
posted,
exists, and in order
in terms of the
for-
argument you posted, that's fine.
Okay, sure. So what's the argument for? So I don't grant any of the premises. So first, I want to form an argument. What's the argument for premise one? Then I can guarantee you won't be able to give one. You'll probably concede on that in about I'll bet like 15 minutes, and then you probably won't be able to give an argument for premise two either. So what's the argument for one?
Well, no, I want to ask about premise 2. You deny the existence of objective morality?
I'm agnostic on it. What's the argument for P1, Matt?
Yeah. Okay. The argument for P1 is that apart from in order for objective morality